All right, so today we have on with Matt Jansen. So Matt, thank you so much for taking the time today to come and join me on this interview. And the last time we've worked together as a coach, a coach-athlete relationship was back in 2013 when I did my first ever show. You helped me out with training, and we've both come a long way since then. And you've grown your coaching business and also yourself as an athlete, as a bodybuilder. So I wanted to get you on today because I think personally that and this is an unbiased opinion, but I think that you've probably progressed the most in terms of an athlete other than anybody I've ever seen over like this short period of whatever that may be, 5 years. So do you want to give a little bit of insight into your career as a bodybuilder and also as a coach over the last couple of years, how you got started and to where you are today?
Yeah, first off, thank you for having me on. For those of you that have heard me talk in the past, my goal is to try to just bring something obviously outside of the factual information, just something a little bit different to this interview. But as a bodybuilder, I would say I competed in 2013. I was a welterweight. I competed at the Tricky Jackson that year. And then what I want to do is I want to point out some key things that I think really helped my development. In 2013, I met Justin Compton. He had a big role in my personal development and also my development as a coach. So I want to give credit where it's due there. In late 2014, 2015, I really started to just question, and I think it's something important for all coaches or bodybuilders to do, and that's question what they know. And not question it in terms of is it right or wrong, but question it in terms of where can you get better. And that's something that I continue to do constantly. I'm always trying to reevaluate. So at that point, I was training, with a high volume approach. My progress wasn't really being tracked. That's a mistake that I made, so late 2014, I really started reading into Dorian's training philosophy, Dante Trudell's training philosophy. And I started to kind of formulate this plan for myself based off of those two. And I would say, honestly, for a while, and, even up through today, I've tried, it's taken me a while to get away from volume simply because I love to train. But at this point, honestly, within having fun in the gym, within my exercise selection, and just, obviously loving to be in the gym, the most important factor to me at this point is progress, and doing what it takes to make progress. So, as 2015, I really started to train to more of a low volume, tracking my weights, making sure my form was perfect within the tracking, but, really trying to make progress in the gym every time I went in there. I still, honestly, 2015, I was training too many days a week. And I would say, honestly, up until the past year, say 365 days, I grasped the concept of lower volume, but it was still very hard for me to rest. I didn't grasp the concept of what, true recovery, what role that plays. And, I'm continuing to learn the value of that. So, this year I've made sure that I take 2 days off a week. If I need extra days off, or if I take an extra day off, I view it more so as a blessing that I know is going to help my training. And I've seen the value in that because I was so beat up, going into the gym in, say, 2016, 2017. I didn't even realize it until this past year, where I put more of an emphasis on rest. I feel mentally fresher every time I go in the gym. I don't have this head fog, and honestly, guys, I think it takes, in order for recovery to really matter, you have to really know how to take a set to failure. And that's still something, the more mature I get as an athlete, the more I'm learning that, and to learn how to really maximize each individual set. And then once you do that, there's such a great need to recover from those sets. So those are some of the things that I think I've taken the past few years in terms of meeting Justin. That was huge for me. Continuing to reevaluate my own progress and process, find ways to make it better. And honestly, the reason why I point to Dorian and Dante is because those were two guys that Dorian within his own training, Dante within training others, they were able to take less than genetically gifted physiques, and do something special with them. And Dorian was very gifted. I'm not going to say that he's not, but I do think that the guys that he was beating had more genetic potential than what he did. But yet he found ways to beat them. And I'm reading. Go ahead.
Yeah. So your training philosophy is obviously like with Dorian, the kind of higher intensity, lower volume, and then I guess with Dante, it's drop sets or beyond failure sets and keeping the overall volume low, is it, and frequency low, or do you just keep the amount of sets and you're trying to minimize the time in the gym? Because one thing I noticed from your website, Matt Jansen, and also from just watching you over the years, that you train extremely hard, and it looks like often you're pushing way beyond failure, which you couldn't obviously do if you're getting in a ton of sets and reps.
Exactly. So basically, in my mind, if you take what Dorian did and if you take what Dante has applied, a lot of it's the same. I think what Dante is trying to do, in my own opinion, this isn't his words, or I haven't heard him say this, but Dorian trained with a partner. So Dorian was able to get force reps. If you're training by yourself, you're not able to get those force reps, but yet that's when something like a rest pause set has so much merit, because you're able to then extend that set beyond what you would be capable of, if you weren't by yourself. So I think that's where there's so much merit, because a lot of times I do train by myself. So in those instances, I do things like rest pause. But what I'm also going to say is that the stronger I get and the more I'm able to really truly take a set to failure, the less I see a need for that, just because of how exhausted I am after that set, in terms of muscular exhaustion. And one of the things that I do a lot, and it's such a tried and true way for me to gauge, if I really did, take that set to failure, is I'll do a top end set and then I'll do a back off set. Well, if I fully take my top end set as far as I can take it, and then I do a back off set after I've recovered, what I've noticed is whether I'm stripping 45 pounds off the bar on each side or 25 pounds off the bar on each side, it's very rare that I'm able to surpass the reps that I got on my top end set, even though I had more weight. And it's just because I've truly maximized that set. So even though the weight is less, the fatigue is already set in within that muscle. So it brings up, what you said. It's like, if you're truly training to failure, it's very, very hard to train high volume, and that's why I question a lot of people when they say, I do 5 sets of squats and I do 5 sets of hack squat. I mean, if you look at my total warm-up sets, yeah, there's 5 sets there, but how many are truly working sets? How many are truly sets just building up, acclimating the weight, those types of things? And that's what you need to look at. A lot of times, even working, I'm sure we'll get into this, but working with Nathan, I don't count anything other than what we do for our, when I say it's time to go, when it's time to work, versus when Nathan previously, his first warm-up was a set. He counted that as a set. So if you're doing 4 sets of a movement and his first warm-up is a set, his second warm-up is a set, he might have never reached max weight before he was going on to the next movement. So that's just something that, for those of you listening, in order to get the most out of your training, you really got to just be counting the actual work that's done and not the sets leading up to that work. But within that being said, the sets leading up to that work have a specific purpose. And that purpose isn't to induce fatigue. That purpose is to allow your body to acclimate to the load. And that's something else that I think a lot of people get wrong, is that my goal when I go into the gym is to lift the maximum amount of weight that I can for the maximum amount of reps. So how do I get there? Yes, it's very, very important that you warm up, but if you're taking every weight leading up to your top end set to the same number of reps as your top end set, you're already going to induce a level of, sub-maximal fatigue from doing that. So as I work up to my working set, the closer I get to my working set, the less reps I'm doing in those warm-ups. Because, again, my goal is to get my body to acclimate and then be as fresh as possible for that top-end working set.
I get you. So you found that, would you consider yourself someone that's not as genetically gifted? I've heard you say that or seen you say that you don't feel like you're as maybe genetically gifted as some of the Olympia competitors or whatever, but you still seem to have made progress even beyond what some of them have made, in spite of the fact that you may not be as genetically gifted. And do you find that that's due to you having changed that from moving from a high volume to more lower volume, but actually doing the work in the, higher intensity with all these intensity techniques?
Yeah, I mean, I think, even those that are, I want to make sure I cover everything here, but even those that are genetically gifted, like I think about bodybuilding all the time. Like I think about, if LeBron trained for a year straight, how he trained for 6 months, how would have he looked? If Dexter's like on both sides of the coin, because I think the way that Dexter's trained, I have so much respect for, because it's allowed him to be at the top of the game for so long. But yet if he fully gassed it in his training, at one point in his career, what would Dexter look like? I mean, it could be something we've never seen before. But, in terms of myself, and I'll say this to any of you guys, I think it really takes, honestly, 7 to 10 years to even see what your genetics look like. It takes a lot of commitment. I've been living the bodybuilding lifestyle 100%. And yes, I've gotten better at it. But at each point, in my mind, I was doing my best. Since I was 19 years old. I'm 28 now. I'm 29 now. So it's been 10 years, and that's consistent. Like there's not been a time where, or a day outside of planned days, for family events or whatever. But like I follow the diet every year for the past 10 years. So I think some people are too quickly to undercut what their genetics are actually capable of. Now I'll say structurally, we can talk about structure in terms of genetic structure. No, there's no way that I'm the best. Even like, trying to give an example. For example, like Nathan's structure, because he's somebody that I've worked with that's very structurally blessed. Nathan at 235 versus me at 225, completely in shape, it looks very different. Nathan looks much bigger, and that's due to his genetic structural gifts. But in terms of muscle genetics, I don't think that I have bad muscle genetics. Again, like my structure isn't the best. My front double bicep isn't the best. You have some people that have trained for 2 years that they open up their lats on a front double bicep and it looks awesome. They might not even be training back properly, so genetics in that way, I think, play a role. But the ability to genetically add muscle, I think I do have that, and I've found ways to maximize that. But yet at the same time, I think if I was training like I was training in 2014, I wouldn't be where I'm at today. So it's been the revision and constantly, digging into my process of how I approach things that's got me to where I'm at, in terms of a bodybuilder.
So what is your ultimate goal as a bodybuilder? Is it to become IFBB pro? Is it to get
if I could say my ultimate goal first and foremost, and I'm big on prioritizing things in the order that they need to be done. I want to become a professional. And then once that goal is accomplished, if the time is right and it's right for my family, I would love to finish top 5 at a show. And I think, honestly, I think that's the end of the road for me. Simply because I have a family that needs me. And I know how selfish this sport can be. And even, I would say that I try to not be a selfish bodybuilder, but from the standpoint of how much time it takes to be your best, there's no way that you can't be selfish in that, and that's what I've learned over the past, 15, 16 months since we've had our son is, up to that point of before we had him, I felt much less selfish being a bodybuilder because my wife was right alongside me doing everything. We spent time together that way. She was okay with it, whether she was prepping or not. We did the cardio together. We cooked together. Like it didn't seem very time consuming because it was just our lifestyle, but since he's been here, he's been the priority, which means that it's taken away our time and doing that together as a lifestyle. So now when I go do cardio, I'm taking time away from the family. When I train, I'm taking time away from the family. So, within that dynamic, I do want to turn pro. That's my goal. But I'm not going to let it sacrifice. Like there's got to be a time limit on it, for me. And that's why I'm really pushing hard now and trying to maximize the time I have now, because by the time my son's 5, 6, 7 years old, like I want to be his dad. I want to be his coach. I want to be there for his practices. I want to take him to school, things like that. So that to me is more of a priority. Would I love to put a stamp and a stamp of accomplishment on my bodybuilding? Yes, absolutely. That's what I'm working every day for now. But I also know that a time's going to come where I gotta make a decision, in terms of who I am as a man and my family. So that's where I'm at.
So with that being said, and all the sacrifices that you attribute to, being a professional bodybuilder or using that as a career, what do you think it takes to be an Olympian then? Because I know that you said maybe it's not an ambition of yourself, but as a coach, which is your job, you've had 16 people at the Olympia, which is the pinnacle of the sport over the last couple of years. So like from being around those people, coaching those people, living with those people at some stages, what is it that you feel makes an Olympian, besides obviously the hard work, genetics, etc.? What makes them stand out?
This is across the board. It's just for the Olympians, it's the pinnacle for them. But I say it as much as I can. But the most success that I have with athletes are the athletes that work the hardest, and that's no different for the Olympians. Again, the time standpoint of what they do from cardio and training and recovery means, like it's, it can be a full-time job, and the guys at the top, it is a full-time job for them. Not to say that they can't be making money outside of bodybuilding, because I do believe that they can, but in order to be your best, it takes a lot of time. Michaela Aycock, I'll talk on, speak about her for a second. She approaches this every day as if she's in prep, and it shows. She's accomplished things with, again, less than stellar, let's say, quote unquote, structure genetics, in a very short time that I don't think that anybody else with her set of gifts would it be able to do, because of the fact that she's 100% perfect every day. She's 100% perfect. And I mean that in everything. Like, her routine is she gets up, she goes and does her cardio in the off season. She does stretching routines in the morning. She does abs in the morning. She has 2 meals. She goes back and trains. She goes and does, whether it's a session with a chiropractor or a stretching session or something like that after, and that's every day. She trained on Christmas, and, and not to say that you have to train on Christmas, but again, it just shows her level of commitment. Justin Compton was the same way. Dallas was the same way. When Dallas was prepping for this last Arnold, he didn't go home for Thanksgiving or Christmas. Granted, could he have? Yes. But his level of commitment and desire made him stay in his area where he could be in his routine. So it's a lot of being really good at doing the same thing over and over and over, and that's what I think. And I think that's like the turning point for a lot of bodybuilders, is whether or not they can handle that or not. Because that's what it really takes to be successful, is sticking to a plan, sticking to your beliefs, believing. Another thing too is just the mental confidence aspect of what it takes to be an Olympian. I think there's several reasons why people get into bodybuilding. Some it's an athletic competitive endeavor after they finish, ball sports. For others, they started lifting because they were overly small or made fun of, or, maybe to compensate for some insecurity. And I see that, when I'm working with somebody that was a previous athlete, I can, approach their prep and I can coach them in a certain way, versus somebody that got into this because they were small. Those insecurities are still there and they still come out. So it's about the people that, whether they have the insecurities or not, how they manage those. I'm trying to use people that I work with, but Ian, for an example, he is as cool as it gets when it comes to prepping for a show. You know, like very, very little stress. For him, I think the stress marker that I pick up on is when he might be lacking a little bit of confidence. That's the only time that he's going to speak up and, you know, and kind of double ask if we're on point or if he looks okay, you know, but 9.5 out of 10 times, he just is like cool as can be. Show weekends, just chilling on the couch, laughing, cutting up, you know, no problems. Other people that I've worked with in the past, like you can just sense like the anxiety and the constant looking at themselves. And, you know, I do think that plays a role. Like, you know, even if you just looked at, if you take away the physiques and if you look at the facial expression that Sean Roden had this year on the Olympia stage versus the facial expression that Phil Heath had on stage, you can tell a difference of what's going on in their head. Sean was 100% confident. You know, especially in certain shots, Phil is either kind of, and this is no knock to him, it's just something I observe in athletes. Like Phil's facial expressions show that there's concern, that he knew that either something was off or that he knew that he might be getting beat. And that's very visible. You know, so I think that too is, take away bodybuilding, you know, that confidence, the way that you handle pressure, the way that you handle your anxiety, things like that, that's what makes a great athlete. That's what makes a successful athlete. And those things really matter when you get to that top tier, in terms of how you handle yourself and you know, how your body looks because of that.
So it's pretty much like any pro sport. You just, it's a lot of it's a mental game, a mind game, like, you know, how you can compose yourself.
Yeah, for sure.
So Matt, we talked a little bit about your training philosophies, how you've peeled it back a little bit in terms of the overall volume and a little bit more intensity. What about your nutrition philosophies then? How do you approach nutrition in terms of supplementation and then nutrition? Like, what's your philosophy on nutrition?
You know, I don't think I really have, I'm not like a carb guy or a fat guy or, you know, I just try to find the best approach for the individual, you know, and I know that's very cliche, but you know, that's the honest truth. Like, I just don't always go one direction. And I also really try to pay attention to the feedback that they're giving me, you know, on a daily basis. For example, I'll give you, you know, again, from the Olympia this year, Ian ate the most food on a daily basis out of everybody. Ian's refeeds were also very high. Charles, on a daily basis, ate less food than Ian and Nathan, but his refeeds were higher than Nathan's. Nathan had a pretty consistent daily diet on the lower end of the spectrum, but then his refeeds were more moderate. You know, so you got Ian, who's basically high throughout the day, high refeed. You got Charles, who's low throughout the day, high refeed. And then you got Nathan, who I found, you know, the more moderate approach overall seemed to work best for him. You know, so when it comes to just basic bare bone macronutrition, you know, I do like to keep protein high. I like to keep it around 2 pounds per, you know, based off of their lean tissue. So I try to calculate where the guy's going to be on stage, and then I get the protein requirements off of that. Carbs, I try to keep as high as I can within the goal. And I do, you know, I'm not an anti-fat person at all. You know, I think there's merit to using monounsaturated sources of fat. I like keeping a little bit of beef in the diet for the mineral content in the beef. You know, so I'll keep those things in as long as they're making progress as well. So typically speaking, when it comes time to pull, I'm going to reduce the fats on the lower end of the spectrum first, try to keep the carbs higher, and then the carbs will slowly trickle down as needed. And then in terms of, you know, refeeds, I am a big proponent of refeed when needed. You know, I think typically when I start a dieting phase with somebody, the first again, it's very individualistic, but the first 3 to 6 weeks, I don't think most people should need one. Your daily calories should be, you know, high enough where your fat loss should be sustained. You shouldn't be overly flat, things like that. And then I try to use 2 things. I try to use a variety of protein sources, And then carb sources, I'm not huge on variety. I just want to more so use what I know their body digests well. Like for me personally, I like to use a lot of rice, cream of rice, things like that. And then even this last prep, which you might have saw in my video, but I wanted to use some rice cakes just for a different texture. And those kind of backfired on me. Granted, I was using the Lumberg brown rice cakes versus all my other rice was white rice, but I started to get stopped up by using the rice cakes. So I pay close attention to digestion. Rice seems to work very well for most people. If they can handle potatoes, I like to keep a little bit of potato in the diet as well, and then kind of go from there. So if you have more specific questions on nutrition, I'd be happy to answer them. But that's kind of just my general approach.
And so with regards to the
go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry. With regards to the overall digestion, do you focus on certain groups, eliminating certain groups of foods like artificial sweeteners or like junk food or anything like that? Do you have a list of foods that you prohibit for digestive reasons, or how do you get your athletes to track their digestion so you know that their digestion is on point as they start to go through their prep and diet?
Yeah, I think during my time doing this, I've found that there's certain trigger foods. So within an off-season plan, I try to give variety. Within that off-season, one of my goals within the off-season is to try to find what foods work and don't work. So that way, when it's time to prep, we can just get to work and know what works. Some of the biggest foods that I found issues with are egg whites. I honestly don't think that the egg was created to be separated, and that's my opinion on it. Whole eggs seem to digest very well. When you're starting to have a greater ratio of whites to yolks, I think that's when, especially on a consistent daily basis or even multiple times a day, that's when people start to have issues. And whether or not we want to, face it or be real with ourselves, like if your gas smells like eggs, your body's not processing that right, So that's a huge one for me. That when I look at somebody's diet, that's the first thing that I'm going to take out if there's an issue. If somebody came to me and they're typically on a lower fat diet for a long period of time, they might have issues digesting fat. So I'll initially pull the fats back down, add something like some betaine HCl in to help them better digest and absorb those fats. And then I'll try to start bringing them back up. Some athletes struggle with avocado. For those athletes, I'll just swap out, a macadamia nut or an olive oil for them. Seems to work better. Kind of a weird one that I've had issues, I would say probably 5 to 6 times, is with blueberries, where the athlete's just not digesting the blueberries and they're going right, straight through them. That's an odd one, but again, like there's been some consistency with that causing issues with people. So I've addressed that. But that's my I want to try to get out all those foods that might be causing issues. That way, when it's time to prep, we can just get to work.
So when it comes to the food choice, you really just focus on digestion, or do you have any certain foods that you think aid performance? Do you like to focus on certain intra-workout carbs or any foods pre-workout, post-workout? And then do you just let your athletes in the off-season follow, I suppose, a flexible dieting approach where they can basically just hit their macros, or do you say reduce, eliminate or reduce sugar, or, stay away from certain junk foods, or do you just kind of let them give them free reins?
No, in the off season, I'm very structured. And I'm not big on just letting them fill their macros either. Because again, like I said, like if the goal for them is to be a competitive athlete, then I want the off season to closely mirror what we're going to do during the prep. As far as intra-workout nutrition, yeah, I'm big on that. I think, trying to be as anabolic as possible, decreasing muscle protein breakdown, I think that's huge, So again, within the athlete's plan, if my thing is, my logical reasoning behind it is for intra-workout drinks, I like to actually put those in. I'll either split them if it's a large amount, or preferably if it's a smaller amount, I want the person to be drinking their intra drink on the way to the gym. Because for me, it makes more sense to have those nutrients in your body to then utilize during training rather than just sitting in your stomach. Because if you're sipping 50 grams of cyclic dextrin over a 90-minute workout, sip by sip, you're really never getting a large bolus of that at one point, Same thing with, essential amino acids. So if you're getting all that in the 20 minutes prior to training, so that way it can get passed through your stomach and be utilized, to me, that makes more logical sense. So for the athletes to have a smaller amount of carbohydrates, I try to get them to get it all in prior to. Let's say if we're in the range of 100 to 150, I might split it 75, prior to, 75 during. Intra-workout nutrition is also a great place. Do I think it's 100% necessary? No. But it's a great place to add nutrients to somebody's plan when you're wanting to add weight or when you're needing to add calories. Those liquid calories that digest fast are a great way to do that. So I am a proponent of that when necessary. And then during dieting, for me personally, I typically remove the intra-workout drink quicker, sooner rather than later, because of the fact that I would rather have whole foods around training, more whole foods and less during. So that's my personal preference. And that is my preference because I do think that it's a helpful tool, but I don't think it's a necessary tool.
So if somebody's on low carbs, and would you structure the majority of the carbs around the workout? Let's say they found it difficult to, or they found that they had a lot of hunger in the evening because just on low calories, they're dieting, they're low body fat. Would you still structure the majority of the carbohydrates around the workout, or would you give them some freeway to kind of blunt that hunger in case that they might fall off the diet or eat extra? Or is it just kind of a suck it up mentality where you got to be hungry, you got to face this, and we just have to keep the carbs around the workout?
I'm pretty firm on those types of things. I think again, there's many ways to skin a cat. I just think that in my opinion, you need to be placing the nutrients around what's most important. And for me, being fueled properly during training is what's most important during the day. So there's several ways, but let's say in an ideal world where, somebody wakes up in the morning, they go to do cardio. I do think replenishing some glycogen post cardio is important. I found that, especially for me, if I had a breakfast without carbs versus a breakfast with carbs, I felt a little bit better having the carbs after cardio, especially if you're actually going hard during your cardio. And then let's say they train after 2 or 3 meals. I would keep all the carbs earlier in the day, and then the last few meals would be carbless post-training. But if I have somebody that works a regular job, so they're getting up early in the morning doing their cardio, what I would do then is I would place the carbs around meal 1. They might be carbless for a little bit during the middle of the day if necessary, and then I would put the carbs again pre and post in the evening if they're training in the evening. But I try my best to not act off of people's emotions. Like if you're prepping for a show, if you want to be 100%, if you want to be in that top tier athletes, you're absolutely going to be hungry. And honestly, for me, I was more hungry with my carb meals than with my non-carb meals. But as best as I can, I'm pretty firm on those things. I don't give a lot of flexibility at all. And honestly, I view coaching in a positive glass half full way. So my first thought process is, well, maybe I should give them some carbs in the evening so they're less tempted to eat. Like if their temptation is to eat, then we got to go back to square A to begin with to figure out what the problem is or address that issue, because you're not going to be your best on stage if you're being tempted on a daily basis to eat food that is not on your plan. That's my thought process on it.
So you find that it's, even if they're hungry, that's the issue you got to solve, not actually give them the food to satiate them, but figure out why it is that they haven't got the mindset to stay on. Is it?
Yeah. I mean, because they're definitely going to be hungry, but if we're constantly trying to solve hunger, you're not going to be in contest shape. So in my opinion, I'd rather somebody be hungry at night when they're sitting on the couch doing nothing than have no energy going into their training session. If you're limiting foods during training just so you can be happy at night on the couch and have a few more carbs in the evening, to me, your mind's not in the right spot. To me, like the most important part of your day as a bodybuilder is your training session and fueling yourself for that. Now, granted, we could look at, our carbs better digested the night before if you're training early in the morning. There's we could get into tons of science about this. But, and yes, there's merit to all that, but let's do what's most important for the task at hand. And that task should be your training for that day, not how you're going to manage yourself in the evening when you have nothing to do,
Makes total sense. Matt, I wanted to talk a little bit about, we briefly spoke about it before, was blood work. So how important is that, do you find, for athletes, for even people who are maybe not even competitive bodybuilders, but just want to improve in the gym, get bigger? How important do you think that is? And it's something that I actually neglected for quite a while, and only recently I got blood work, which I'll start to do more frequently. So what's your opinion on that? I know you're big on it, but do you want to give your piece of advice on that, or what your thoughts are?
Yeah, I mean, it's vital. It's like running a race car and never getting, bringing your race car into the shop to making sure your levels are fine. It's the same thing. It's funny you mentioned that. I've had a reminder up on my personal coaching email for the past month, because it's hard to keep up with everybody's lab work. But if you tell everybody I want labs every quarter, and keep them responsible for that, then everything should be coming in fine. But blood work is important for overall health. Number one, not pushing the boundaries too far. Blood work is also very important. If you believe and in your heart of hearts you're doing everything right, you're following the plan, and the plan is not working, that's a great reason for me to go and have them suggest some labs, whether that be labs on their thyroid or just an overall metabolic panel, something like that. But I think that you're definitely going to short yourself if you don't check your blood work. I know there's also some fear involved in some people, and that's why they don't check their blood work, but that's also a huge lack of responsibility on your part, as an athlete, as an individual. Yep. If you're making choices that are going to dictate what your blood work says, but you're not following up with what the actual numbers are, then that's something that falls on you. But, as far as an athlete, as a coach, I'm a very big proponent of blood work, and checking things like kidney values are very important. EGFR is very important. Homocysteine is very important. C-reactive protein. Those are the things that, in terms of, your overall health, I've had an echocardiogram done on my heart. Things like that. It's just, if you're going to make certain choices within the sport, it's important that you're responsible and backing those choices up with being responsible with your health as well.
So if somebody came into you and they felt like they were sticking to the plan, let's say they were eating appropriate calories they should be progressing, they're sleeping well, but they're just not making any progress visually or strength-wise, is that when you would suggest, well, maybe there's something wrong hormonally that you need to go and get a work done?
Yeah. I mean, there's two things, and I'll be upfront and transparent. There's the blood work that I look at, and also too, the underground drug market is something that's always constantly in the back of my mind, especially with females, because a lot of the drugs that females are taking are the higher, the more expensive end drugs, yet they're often faked. They're often swapped out for a cheaper compound, something like that. So that's always something else too. When I'm working with a female and they've had, a period where they're doing everything by the book and something's not flowing right, those are the two things I bring up. What have you done in the past? Or I look at what they're, doing currently that should be giving us results X, Y, and Z. They're not. Girls out there listening to this, there should be nothing that you need to take that's going to add a tremendous amount of water to your physique, or it's going to add a tremendous amount of weight to you in a short period of time. If you're taking something and either one of those things are happening, chances are you're not taking what you think you're taking, or you're just taking something that you don't need to be taking in general. But that comes to mind. And like I said, that's more at play with females. Obviously with males, you got things like estrogen that I look at if something's not going right. Prolactin levels, those are also important as well. But I see this thought process of what could be going wrong more so on the female side in terms of compounds that might be faked or they're not taking what they think they're taking. And that's, that's an issue that I'll bring up with them as well.
So it leads me into a good segue, but you mentioned there like drugs and steroids. So, or drugs and bodybuilding, I mean. So a lot of people will think that in order to get to here, or to go from here to here, you need to take this amount of drugs, and you need to do all this. And then to go from here to there, you need to take, 10 times that. And that's why like a lot of the pro bodybuilders, the Olympians, they're on a shit ton of gear. What's your overall view on drugs in the sport, and what's your kind of, I guess, philosophy in that side of it?
Again, individual response is huge. But I'm honestly just not saying this. You want to take the least amount that you can and make progress off of, and ride that out for as long as you can. A couple of things that just kind of boggle my mind is the amount of compounds that are being used within a cycle, to the point where you don't even know what's working and what's not. I for one, I like to look at individual compounds and know what this is doing in a person's body. If you got 4 or 5 things in the mix, you're just kind of throwing things at a canvas and hoping something sticks, versus you could have 1 thing, 2 things in the mix and make really solid progress. And what those things were to then, revisit them, maybe revisit them next time at a little bit higher milligram dosage, something like that. But again, you hear so much information, and I can promise you guys this: the guys at the top, the guys that have gotten to the top, 9 times out of 10, they're getting there on a lot less than what you think they're getting there on, and that I promise you that. And honestly, we joke amongst ourselves when we're talking about things, but if I were to post some of the cycles of some of the guys that I work with, we would just be called liars, but that's the truth and what they're taking. And it's not crazy amounts. Is it what's needed to be competitive at that level? Yes. But it's also very individual, I'm not throwing everybody on the same exact amount, or I'm not, everybody's not using the same compounds. And again, that's the honest truth in it. Do some people need a lot to be successful? Yes, I will say that, but it's not that in order to be successful, you need to take a lot. In order to be successful, you need to take what's necessary. But within that, the training needs to be on point. The sleep needs to be on point. And also too, there's this misconception or this concept that if you're on gear, you can kind of eat what you want, get away with what you want. When you're on gear, your plan should be even more perfect. Because for one, you're putting yourself in a health risk. So if you're putting yourself in a health risk that could increase your blood pressure, have an impact on your lipids, then you don't want to double that by also eating a bunch of junk food that's going to also have an impact on your blood pressure and on your lipids and things like that. And I think that's where people really miss the mark is they don't treat their off-season cycles like their prep cycles. Because at least for most, like a prep should be 100% on point. Your off season should also be 100% on point, and that's where you really make the progress. It's not just about taking stuff, eating what you want, training, decently hard, and you're going to look crazy. Then that's where guys miss the mark, and then they take this cycle and they eat 60% how they should, and they're training 75% how they should, and they're like, oh, well, that didn't work. So then they add more to the next and more to the next, and that's where you're getting these massive cycles from, in my opinion.
And what with the guys who do that stuff, they just stack on thing after thing. Do you think that that's having long-term? You think in the long term that will have negative health implications? And then on the other side of that, do you think there's actually health benefits from doing things like TRT? What's your view on that?
TRT within cycles, is that what you mean? Or
no, I mean just as a standalone from somebody who's maybe not even bodybuilding, but just using it for health purposes, as you age, specifically men. And then the second question, which is kind of not related, but off what you were saying in terms of the guys who just stack things upon things, does that have negative health implications long term versus can TRT by itself have positive health implications?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the first question about just stacking things on top of stacking things, Yeah, obviously the more you take, the more you're going to risk your health, but at the same time, I want to encourage you guys that just because you've reached this pinnacle of dosages doesn't mean that you can't go back and still make progress. One of the guys that I've turned pro in the past 2 years, I would say he's turned pro on maybe a little bit more than a third of what he used to be taking, or at least half of what he used to be taking, and he's thrilled by that, so that's just a testament that if you're doing everything right, the supplement side of things is simply there to supplement. And yes, it's going to help, but that doesn't mean more is better. Just because 500 milligrams works doesn't mean you should take 1,000. And just be perfect. Challenge yourself to be perfect in every part of your plan, and I promise you that the smaller amounts will work for you. As far as TRT, I'm honestly a huge proponent of it in bodybuilding, outside of bodybuilding, for a lot of reasons. I think as bodybuilders, PCTs have been kind of turned into this cookie cutter thing where you take X, Y, and Z for 6 weeks and all is going to be well. But a lot of times, again, individual specificity really comes in here. It might take somebody's, the HPTA axis, like it might take them 16 weeks to come back. So that first 6 weeks, you're literally just tanking your hormones. And if you're not continuing to monitor your blood work, and that's something else that I see. People don't monitor their blood work during their PCT. The whole point of a PCT is to get your luteinizing hormone back, to get your follicle stimulating hormone back. If you're not checking on these things and you're just popping some Nolvadex, you're doing yourself a huge disservice. So if that's going to be the case, if you plan to just go off 6 weeks just to crash yourself and then go right back on, I'd rather see an individual like that, like maintain stable hormones, drop down to true TRT, HRT levels, rid themselves of the Clomid and the Nolva and all the other drugs if you're not going to allow those things to truly work, and, just keep yourself stable. And then that way too, as you exit bodybuilding, if you do have trouble getting back, TRT is a great option. The thing the thing that you need to watch out for most with TRT is obviously over time your hemoglobin, your hematocrit is going to rise up, so you need to be donating blood. But in a lot of ways, it's not a huge health concern as long as you're monitoring your blood pressure, your hemoglobin, hematocrit levels, and it's going to keep you stable versus crashing, versus your estrogen coming up, things like that, especially if you're not being responsible with your blood work during a PCT.
Perfect. Thanks for that answer, man. So Matt, I don't want to keep you too much longer, but where can people find out more information about you?
All right. So the easiest way to reach out to me, my email is matt@camp-jansen.com. That's where I prefer people reach out to me. If you want to follow along with what I'm doing, my website is camp-jansen.com. And then on Instagram, it's mattjansen8.
And what's the future plans for you, Matt, over the next, say, 12 months or so?
To have a lot of fun in the gym. I want to be the strongest I've ever been by the end of this year. And that's across the board. And I think, honestly, I'm close now. But there's like a few lifts. Like this time last year, I was overhead barbell pressing 315 for 5 reps. This past week, I was at 305 for 6 reps. So like, I want to surpass everything I've ever done in the past by a measurable number for more weight and more reps. And that's going to be a fun part of this year for me, is just really getting stronger. I want to improve my front double bicep. If I'm getting really specific, that's one of my goals. I've had an ongoing leg issue for the past 2 years with my left leg. So my goal is to get that fixed this year, so I can get back to training legs and squatting like I love to do. So I'm actually going to be getting an MRI on that in the next 2 weeks. I'm waiting to schedule that now. We just switched over insurances. So that to me is at the forefront, because I want to, in order to have the physique that I have in my mind, I've got to get my leg fixed, because it impacts a lot. And it impacts a lot just outside of bodybuilding. It impacts me playing with my son, just getting on the floor, things like that. So it's kind of annoying. I want to get that fixed. And then I'll, get back on the national stage. My wife and I, we are pregnant again. Um, she, we found out around Thanksgiving that she was pregnant. So there's going to be baby number 2 coming in July. So my initial plan was to do USAs. So that's going to be put on the back burner. So I'll just continue to train and have fun training. Coaching wise, I want to make sure that I return all my athletes to the Olympia this year. I have a few good guys that I'm also really looking forward to helping them turn pro this year. And then I have a personal goal. I want to bring somebody new to the Olympia that's never been. So that's kind of where things are at in my mind for right now. And just helping bodybuilding grow, being somebody that's a positive influence, not negative influence, staying out of the negativity, encouraging people. And for those of you listening to this, there's also this thought process that coaches shouldn't encourage other coaches, athletes. And, I honestly think that's nonsense. I might get on and encourage somebody, and that has nothing to do with me wanting to coach them or anything like that. I'm just trying to be a positive influence. I know if when I was 17 years old, if Neil Hill or and I'm not saying I'm Neil, but what I'm saying is if Neil would have commented on something, that would have meant the world to me. And that's all I'm trying to do is just use my, use the person that I am as a coach and just make an impact on others for the better, whether or not I have a direct coaching impact on them or not. So that's kind of where my focal point is for this year.
So Matt, if you had one piece of advice for somebody who wants to become a better bodybuilder, they want to gain more muscle, they want to grow as a person all around, what would that one piece of advice be?
You need to be able to commit a tremendous amount of time in order for that to happen, because it's not going to happen overnight and it's not going to happen fast. And then also within that, make sure the support system around you is a support system that encourages you to be able to reach that goal. And then just be consistent, and that's why I brought up the point. I wasn't trying to brag, but, I think about it often. I'm like, man, I've been dieting, since I've been 19 years old. I followed a structured diet. And I'm still nowhere close to where I want to be, and I feel like I've really done the best that I can for the past 10 years. So this takes a long time. And if you're not in it and you're not committed to that endeavor, then do something else, because we do miss out on a lot of life, by doing this. Whether you want to admit it or not, you miss out on a lot, especially in the American culture. A lot of things are centered around food and dinners and things like that. And you might be present, but if you're not eating the meal, it's not like you really are enjoying and fully investing in that time. So, unless you truly love this, find something else that you want to do, because it takes a long time to really get to where you want to be. A lot of patience and some frustration along the way, but that's part of it.
Well, Matt, thanks very much for coming on today, and I wish you all the best then in the future with yourself and also with all your athletes.
Yeah, man, I really, really appreciate you having me on.
Thanks.